Hi, everybody. This is Joanne with Read Science, and I am joined, as always, by Jeff Schomeyer, my co-host. And today we are joined by Helen Scales, who is sitting in the UK currently. She is the author of several books, including the one we will focus on today, The Brilliant Abyss, Exploring the Majestic Hidden Life of the Deep Ocean and the Looming Threat that Imperils It. And I have read past books of Helen's and loved them. So I was so excited that she had a new book and we had the opportunity to speak with her today. Do you want to say hi to everybody, Helen?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that lovely introduction. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're so glad. So let me read your bio from the back of the book. And Helen Scales, PhD, is a marine biologist, writer, and public broadcaster. She is the author of Spirals in Time, The Secret Life and Curious Afterlife of Seashells, and Eye of the Shoal, A Fish Watcher's Guide to Life, the Ocean, and Everything. She has written for National Geographic, The Guardian, New Scientist, BBC Wildlife Magazine, and BBC Focus, among others. Everywhere our favorite authors write, I think, and appears regularly on BBC Radio. She teaches marine biology and science writing at Cambridge University and advises the marine conservation charity Sea Changers. And you're sitting now in Cambridge.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yes,
Great.
that is correct. So not very close to the ocean, sadly, but I have some fish to keep me company, just in case I forget what it's all about.
Very good. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh,
it's really a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
It is a pleasure. And I don't always start with glowing reviews or anything, but I think Joanne and I both found your book very rewarding, very enlightening, and great fun to read. But we also found that we both had some very strong reactions. There was astounded delight at some of the biology and the physical processes we learned about in the deep ocean, and also our absolute horror at all the countries and corporations drooling to exploit the deep sea any way they can. And I think we'll get to all that. But to begin, I want to read out a couple of quotations and an observation I made that all relate to something I thought was an interesting theme of the entire book, and then ask you whether I was right about that and what you think. First quotation: "The oceans have always shaped human lives, but the surface and the very edges have so far mattered the most." Second quotation: "For the longest time, the only things people thought lived in the deep ocean were monsters, demons, and deities." And I remember the time when you talk about this time not so long ago, but in living memory, when people thought the deep ocean was basically empty. There was maybe a whale over there and things, and that informed your discussion of deep sea mining and nodules back from the day when people thought that, well, these nodules have metals we can use and we'll just suck them up because nothing lives down there and nobody cares. And now we know a lot better. And then the observation when you were talking about hydrothermal vents is, once chemosynthetic life was found near hydrothermal vents, it also began to be found elsewhere. And so my question is, what does all of this, the empty deep seas, the lack of, who knew that chemosynthetic life could even exist? What does this say about scientists' preconceptions and scientific discovery and how it's inhibited or not? I thought I'd start with something easy.
Okay, yeah, easy peasy. Well, here's my stock answer to that. No, there's a lovely quote.
But that's a question that always interests me when I'm reading things and thinking, and it just seemed to keep bubbling to the surface. Say
no, absolutely. I think it is a theme through the book, which is, a part of it I think is just this. I guess it's part of human nature to look for more of what we already know and to look in a way that fits with our preconceptions to our model of the world in our minds and whether it's just everyday people imagining what the world is like and sort of drawing those boundaries in our minds of like, well, there's nothing there, or going back to, those ancient maps of here be beasts around the edges of the bits we don't know, and kind of imagining what might be there, but kind of really, assuming that there isn't much of any great interest. So I guess, I suppose there's two things here I'm trying to kind of grasp at. One is that sort of general perception of this big empty space. And I think that lingers a lot today. And I think that underpins sort of why, and we'll get to this sort of ideas of how people feel about the exploitation of the deep ocean. Yeah. And I think we've got a long way to go before it does genuinely become something that more people can kind of bring really into their hearts in terms of caring or knowing and caring about what happens in this completely unseen, this hidden part of the world. Even though the scientists are showing us what's there, it's still very easy to ignore it. So I guess that's part of it. And I think that's always been an issue with the ocean. I think I think it underpins a lot of my work, which is trying to push against that sort of like, we can't see it. It's this blue blanket of ocean. Everything down there is hidden, and therefore it's disconnected from us because we can't see it. So it's
something as simple as being able to see it is a big deal in that case, right?
I think so. Yeah, I do. I think so. I think it's hard for us to generally to appreciate that there are these really critical connections between, everywhere throughout the entirety of our living planet, which is all the way to the bottom of the deepest part of the ocean, as we now know. So I think there's that boundary between water and air it's a physical boundary, but I also think it's an incredible mental boundary for us thinking about this place. So even as the science now is starting to show us just how interconnected everything is, physically, chemically, the heat that's moving around, just the sheer fact that we're all species living on this one planet of ours, whether we live in the bottom of the Mariana Trench up a mountain or strolling around on a beach, we're all in this together. And that's a really big concept to get our heads around too, sort of generally. But I want to pick up another point in terms of the science. There really is this sort of, we look for what we know and then you find more of that thing. And it's those kind of, it's like the discovery of hydrothermal vents. So suddenly, boom, like this whole new thing, this whole bubble, universe almost explodes because suddenly you realize it's not as we thought it was. And for me, that's why I find the deep ocean so exciting. Because you do have those extraordinary moments of, oh, wait, it's not what we thought it was. This is a whole new way of life. This is a whole new type of living, a whole new way, the geological breakthroughs, to get all those kind of things. But it often just takes kind of those serendipitous, like it wasn't an intention to go looking for hydrothermal vents and what lives there. I mean, sure, they were looking for the chemistry and the geology, but no one was going there to look for animals. They were completely blown away when they saw anything was living there at all. Same with things like those wonderful bone-eating worms, one of my favorite geocidae.
Yes.
And it was a total surprise. No one was looking for them. No one was looking at bones. And yet they came across this dead whale lying in the Monterey Canyon. There he is. She is, I should say, Ruby the whale. I don't know if they figured out. It was a female whale. Yeah, somehow they figured out from the bones. Yeah. Covered in this pink stuff, which turned out to be a whole new life form that no one had ever seen before. But it was a total chance discovery. As soon as you find one, then people started looking and we found them everywhere. Yeah, and I love that too. It's like you open this little window and go, hey, wait a minute. But it's often that chance first discovery that makes it kind of, you realize you should go look there. And I guess you just don't know what other windows we're going to open, I guess.
How hard was it to convince? I remember hydrothermal things sort of happening in the popular press. It's like, how hard was that to convince people that's like, no, look, there's life there and they metabolize chemistry stuff? Because
it took a couple of years scientifically to figure that out. I mean, that first discovery, I think, was I'm pretty sure it was sort of, National Geographic were sort of filming it and there was pictures and so on.
But it was more figuring out than denying and having to convince them, wasn't it?
No, I think, showing people those images was very powerful. And it did take a couple of years and some really smart scientists to figure out how this thing was possible and how this ecosystem, this incredibly rich ecosystem, was able to support itself in such extreme conditions. So no, I think when the science comes along, people kind of latch onto it. It's getting to that point of doing the science, which is sometimes
and the seeing is really important. The emphasis that the remark that you made about how our main familiarity is with the surface and with the seashores which is very two-dimensional. We're still, I think most of us, me too, reading the book, I discovered it's like I really have no idea how unfathomably big the ocean is.
Yeah.
And how deep
Yeah.
it is. And
yeah.
it's big.
I mean, it's so big. I mean, I tried in a couple of ways in the book to try and figure out ways of demonstrating that. But even
My favorite was the marble.
The marble. Yeah, did you like that? That was fun.
I love
the marble was fun.
So the idea being, if you just took a normal glass marble, I haven't got one to hand, but anyway, I usually wave one at people when I'm talking about this. But yeah, the idea if you sailed out over to off to a part of really deep ocean, and dropped it over the side of your ship, how long would it take to get through all the different layers of the ocean? It was partly an idea of showing that it's like this kind of layers of like in a sundae glass. I don't know if that's the word you would use in American.
Parfait,
like,
maybe
dessert glass.
A trifle. Perhaps.
A trifle glass, yeah. Nice cocktail, maybe. Anyway, but you've got all these different layers: the twilight zone, the midnight zone, the abyss, and then the Hadal zone at the bottom. And that, it would take like 6 hours to get to the very deepest trenches in the Hadal zone at the very bottom. And that is still, it's like that's just like, it's still just crazy, but crazy big.
Well, I love that. I love that you said that. And actually, just before we leave the hydrothermal vent thing, I remember being in middle school. So everyone start calculating my age when the teachers had caught on to this big news and started telling us about it. And I was on Guam. So those watching who don't know this, my dad was in the Air Force and I lived on Guam. So surrounded by ocean for 6 years. Yeah, and really close to the Marianas Trench. Right. So some research vessels would take off from there. So
and you went so far. I mean, okay, the Galapagos is probably a fair old sail from Guam, but
for the hydrothermal vents, that's near the Galapagos.
Closer, but that was the first ones. Was the Galapagos ones? I'm sure there are lots. I know a lot closer to Guam as well. And the Pacific is just generally a very exciting, geologically very exciting place to be, and oceanic. The stuff is amazing around there. So I know they've done some fantastic research more recently, actually, on seamounts and things around Guam. There's been some wonderful NOAA expeditions with amazing image brought back.
It made me think of when I was a graduate student, and about the time of the explosion of interest and discovery of deterministic chaos everywhere. It's like somebody found, they found out it could happen. They discovered these nonlinear systems could do this. You got strange attractors and all of this, and suddenly they were everywhere. And it's like now hydrothermal vents seem to be everywhere you look, almost, don't they?
Definitely in the places we know they form. Joanne, I'd love to ask, actually, do you remember how you felt when those discoveries were coming? Like, what did you think about that sort of, was it like alien life on Earth, or like, how did it?
Yeah. The lipstick tube worms, those things were like, what? So now I was already a curious kid. My path towards science seemed to already be determined. But things like that just really, it blew me away. And I'm so grateful to the teacher to pointing it out. Now, my parents may have, but I doubt it. I remember being in school when I heard about it. So cool. And knowing that really, even though it wasn't near Guam, I'm here where, they were trying to do research and everything else. So that was really just so cool. Exciting. Yeah. I remember being very excited about that, and that those things are living there. Impossible.
And the fact that we're still finding so much more. I mean, there's basically vents dotted all the way along the edges of tectonic plates, wherever they may be throughout the oceans. And a lot of them many have been studied, but many haven't. And pretty much every time somebody goes to look at a new one, it's like, oh, here's another weird thing we didn't know existed. Whether it was a yeti crab or a scaly foot snail, or whoever knows what else is going to come next. But there's this amazing regional differences in vent life. They are very different in different parts of the Pacific. Yeah, those are
These are all these crabs. Oh my gosh, it's like a mound of white crabs.
Huge mound of crabs, exactly. Those are a type of yeti crabs. that were originally discovered again in the Pacific species. These ones, I think those particular ones are, oh no, those are Antarctic actually, but they were originally discovered in the Pacific. There's various different species, and yeah, they kind of dot themselves along the vents, these kind of linear, because the edges of plates are kind of form these lines across the planet, almost like it's sort of the stitching, if you like, between the tectonic plates. And the vents form there. And these ones, yeah, these are Antarctica. And you can see the density of life there. And that's the sort of thing you see, you know, in the middle of a fairly sparsely populated deep ocean. Suddenly it's like, poof, okay, hang on, what's going on here? And again, it's this reliance on this sort of chemical energy as opposed to sunlight, which is driving these ecosystems and is still being, you know, there's still so many questions about how these things are occupied, how they move around, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at the number of things that have no pigment, you know, which you don't need because it's dark and doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, but then the stuff is, some of it is colorful too, and that's pretty
very
weird.
colorful. That's right.
Yeah, the kind of the reds. We think the red color in the deep ocean is a camouflage thing, because at least that's the vampire squid, which is looking beautiful there. The
very nice
squid.
picture.
But the red coloration we think helps to make them look really indistinct, and that's kind of the mid waters where there's well, there's no light, but I think if there's any light at all, it's bioluminescence, which is generally blue and green. So the reds are kind of still hidden away.
Blends in. So, and you did have quite some, a bit of explanation of the scaly foot snail, which is
stunning.
Isn't that a beautiful picture? That was really lovely. It was taken by for me for the book by a wonderful scientist called Julia Sigwart, who I spoke to as well, and she was involved in doing a lot of studies of these guys. They only live, I mean, these ones are very strange. Their shells are made of an iron-based compound, and there's nothing else we've discovered that does that. They have these tri-layered shells, and then the feet covered in scales. I mean,
right,
being Helen Scales,
and those are those are the iron, and they're iron-based scales
as well
too.
As well, and so it's been latterly discovered. I mean, when they originally found, it's one of these things I love as well. You see something, you know, something's discovered, especially animals in the deep ocean. We find things, and people go, that's, you know, especially something like that. These weird snails with these funny feet, and you think, okay, why is that?
Why?
What led to that? Was the evolutionary pathway led to that?
Why
so
not?
the initial assumptions, and in fact, if you read my earlier book, Spirals in Time, I talk about these guys just briefly. And the theories back then were, well, those plates must be some kind of protective measure, like they're being attacked by something, right? They're being attacked by crabs or by other snails, which have these like poison darts to hunt with. Maybe they're protecting themselves. And then it turns out down the line, just a few years, more researchers have looked in detail, and they've taken some of these scales and they've looked at them under the microscope and found they're full of these tiny wee tubes, like nanoscopic tubes. And in fact, it's this incredible like physical process whereby one of the problems with living in these vents, and what they're doing is they're relying on these bacteria that live inside them. They have these symbioses based on these chemical supping microbes, which are harnessing energy from chemicals coming out of the seabed. So it's like this dark equivalent to photosynthesis. So the chemosynthesis is producing carbohydrates, producing energy, but using chemical energy as opposed to sun energy. This energy from sunlight. So these snails, as well as the worms we've talked about, the giant tube worms and yeti crabs, everything else, are basically relying on these microbes. And the snails, like many, have them living inside them. But as a consequence of that process, that chemical process, they produce sulfur, which is toxic to many organisms, especially to snails. And these feet are pulling that sulfur out of their bodies down these tiny tubes like a tailpipe on a car, and then it's reacting with metals in the water and forming these iron compounds, which are then laying down on the surface. And so it's like, it's not an external threat, it's an internal threat that they're protecting themselves from. And no one thought of that when they first looked at them, but then you look a bit closer and you realize that's how they're doing it. That's one way they're surviving in this ridiculously extreme environment of a hydrothermal vent. And it's amazing. It's really cool.
You wonder after the fact why everyone is so surprised, because you've given us this vivid feeling of the ocean, so unimaginably huge, and the water itself and the layers are so many different ecological niches, not to mention the surface, which is not just a featureless surface, but has topography of miles in variety, of mountain ranges that are huge, of deep canyons that are huge, of hot spots, of brine pools, of all sorts of things. And it seems to me there's an awful lot of Darwinism going on for people. It's like, oh, it's a bunch of bunk. It's like, look at every place you look, there's another weird thing doing something that we couldn't even imagine before, because that's what they had to work in this environmental niche. And diversity of life evolves in the most interesting ways.
It really does. I think that's a huge lesson that the deep ocean tells us. And it's why I think, quite rightly, space scientists and, astrozoologists, whatever you want to call them, people wondering about what life might be like elsewhere, the deep ocean has so much to tell us, because it's showing us that life just finds a way, no matter how, where or how.
You asked about reporting. The thing I remember from the earliest discovery of hydrothermal vents, and then the fact that there are animals living there in places that animals were presumed not to be able to live at all, doing chemosynthesis, also unimaginable, was all about exobiology and things like, could there be life on other planets? Science finds new ways, animals that we've never thought of before.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's hydrothermal vents on is it Europa and Enceladus? I mean, go check. You never know.
For all those years that I grew up with people saying, obviously life needs this and this and this, it's like, boy, I think all of those were wrong. And that's exciting.
Life does, but now we know that it's a totally different way of being, like a whole new way of having biological life. And who knows what else we might find too. I mean, I think that's it. We mustn't just limit our horizons anymore, because you never know what might come up. But the deep ocean tells us such a big lesson, and just what's possible. Yeah.
But it is exciting with your submersible and things, because it is a time when there's great value in just looking at things and places. That's always very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've found a lot with the sort of deep sea biology community is that they're genuinely kind of part scientists, part explorers.
Yes.
And that's, it's not to belittle just exploring as its own thing, but I mean, it's because, pretty much anytime anyone goes, I mean, people do return to the same places to do studies and so on, but pretty much every time you look into the deep ocean, no one's looked at that bit before, that piece of water, that piece of seafloor. It's rare that you kind of go back very much. So you are exploring, and because as we've touched on the diversity of the geology and the topography and the biology in the deep ocean, you're always going to find new things. So yeah, but it's sort of translating, I think, that exploration into science as well. It's like, what do we do with that knowledge of knowing these things exist? And there's always the kind of the next level sort of, aside from just I think there is something to be said for absolutely knowing what we share our planet with, and coming up with a better idea of the sorts of the diversity of life that's out there. But it's those, for me, the exciting parts is when those big lessons come, like things like a huge breakthrough like chemosynthesis, or new ecosystems, or a new understanding of some. A lot of the time, to be honest, deep sea biology is like, how the hell are you doing that? Like, that's the big question. How is this possible? How are you feeding? How are you finding a mate? And so many of those questions are still unanswered. That there's always those kind of.
Do we in the public develop more empathy when we find out that whales dive so deeply, and then there you are with the question? It's like, and how in the world do they do that? Yeah. I enjoyed the whole discussion about sticky myoglobins and things, so that and then the fact that they're down hunting for squids who may be oxygen deprived, and so they turn a little stupid and they go, oh look, it's a whale, and the whale eats them.
It's pretty smart, isn't it? Yeah, it's like, I've got my own oxygen. You guys just have to tough out with this meager ocean-borne stuff to breathe through, whereas the whales are like in their own little capsules of air, of atmosphere. Yeah.
But you don't find that out about whale blood and the ability to carry oxygen with them in a uniquely evolved way until you find out that they dive to these extraordinary depths and live there.
I mean, I love that as well. I mean, it was really not that long ago, surprisingly recently, there was discovered that sperm whales specifically, these wonderful dive, I mean, there's several, I mean, many whales do dive very deep, but I think I find the sperm whales the most kind of curious and fascinating because we do know we're getting to know them better, but it wasn't that long ago that people were like, so how do they hunt? I mean, we know they hunt because we catch them. They've been caught for centuries and their stomachs are full of the beaks of squid, of really big squid as well, the ones we know live down in the deep. So how are they catching them? What are they doing? Like, how do they do it? Yeah, that question. You know, are they just hanging there and waiting for stuff to come by? Are they luring them in with some sort of like glowing white belly? And then, it turns out they're like bats and they have sonar and they're chasing around. And I love this. I just love this picture of finally someone was like, we've got this device which shows us where they're moving and how far, and we can listen and we can get the movements. And we're basically tracking them doing these like chasing after a squid, and it does a handbrake turn at the end and sucks the squid in. And they, that we know that now. And this is all happening, by the way, at like 3,000, 4,000 feet down.
Amazing.
And it's that again, it's answering those questions is how this all works that opens up this whole new kind of like, a whole new understanding of these animals and what they're doing and how they're communicating, and
a new appreciation too. I hope that's what made the section on exploitation so disappointing. And there all these interesting facts, like here's one that just jump out. It's a tiny little fact, and yet it's kind of a shocking fact. And in 1930s Europe, almost half of all margarine spreads were made from hydrogenated whale oil.
Yep. Yeah.
I know, right?
We still killed whales just to make butter substitutes.
Yeah.
I know. I remember, talking about the kind of what sort of from a childhood sort of coming through. I remember being kind of in the schoolyard. It was like, you shouldn't lick stamps or envelopes because that's whale. That's made out of whales, or lipstick as well.
Spermaceti
like,
or whatever.
Yeah. And that was the kind of, we would talk about it in the schoolyard. And I think looking back, at the time I don't think I really understood anything. I didn't really know what that meant, or if it was true. But looking back, I think it could have been. We're talking that was like in the early 80s. The moratorium didn't come in until 82. It might have just been the tail end of like, my mom and dad used to kind of thing, whatever. But still really shocking that absolutely within lifetime, this was normal. It was either people didn't realize, or it was completely normal for whale to be this commercial, like industrial product that was getting into into everyone's diets and
everything.
lives.
Yeah. Interestingly, just recently I went to Nantucket and they have a whaling museum there. And it was so fascinating. Now, I thought, I'm not going to care about this, but the biology of it all, and and then how things changed. Whales were becoming in short supply. Petroleum came along, so luckily we didn't need to continue to kill sperm whales and puncture this gland to have all their oil spill out. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It was more fascinating than I thought. And they had a full sperm whale skeleton there because one had washed up on the beach in like 1998 or something. And they even had this little documentary about how, they were trying, okay, how can we take this apart? How can we, and they discovered that the old tools were actually better at this, removing the blubber than, the new fancier tools. And, because nobody's been doing this in recent years.
Right.
And then the surprise of actually puncturing that gland with the oil and how much came out of the spermaceti oil came out was really astonishing to them.
Gosh.
And so I was like, it's funny, we move away from doing those things and how much we even forget. So there's discovery and then there's rediscovery because so if you haven't been to that museum, I recommend it. I wasn't sure. Everyone said go visit it when you're on Nantucket. I'm like, really? And then but it was a surprise, a gem, really.
That's awesome. I'm actually going to be doing it, and again, not in person, sadly, but I am going to do a talk in Nantucket Athenaeum. So I shall ask.
Oh yes,
ask about the whale.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, because they're very proud of this history.
Yeah.
And, but and also some of the oil they had was responsible for a very big fire that destroyed much of the town. So it's
really.
I'm just like, wow, this is. I had no idea I would find this so fascinating, but it was.
Amazing.
Yeah, very much. So I was happy to read about that, like on the heels of having returned from, this trip. And I like how that all builds on each other. So, well, okay. So I want to ask you, you had a question, or you had a comment that there are more astronomers than astronauts. There are more deep sea biologists than the ones who go on Argonauts, right? Like who go under the ocean. So, so as a marine biologist, though, what do you need to be a marine biologist? It seems it can run the whole gamut. You could stay and look at collections of things, people, or you can dive yourself, or you can really dive in a submersible. So this field seems really big. And since you're our first marine biologist, I thought I would take this opportunity to ask about the field. And there may be people here interested, or who have young people in their life interested. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's a hugely wide field, I guess. And we could talk about marine science as an even bigger field of that, and pick out whether you're most interested in the life stuff, which is the biology or the chemistry or the physics, or you want to wrap it all up together. And there's all these intersectional kind of, biochemical oceanographers and people who really think across those boundaries. Because I think to really understand the oceans and to understand how they work, we need people specializing, and we need that kind of crossover between all these different areas. It's all so tied together, the physics, the chemistry, the biology. But if we narrow it down
biology,
to biology,
we means life and ecosystems. And,
life and understanding, what's there. That's a lot, the living systems, whether that's focusing in on a particular species and understanding how that lives and survives, or tracing, connections through to a whole ecosystem and habitats that's all under that kind of marine biology thing. I mean, I guess the kind of the kind of cliched idea of a marine biologist is somebody who studies dolphins, and gets to swim with those guys. And there's plenty of marine biologists who don't scuba dive, who don't get wet, if you like. I mean, there's plenty of dry marine biology to be done. Partly, as I'm showing in the book with deep sea biology, there's so much that can be done now with these remote tools, the technologies we have to study these places where it's very difficult and very dangerous and expensive to put human beings. Therefore, we've got these incredible ways of studying these distant shores and distant realms of the oceans. So really, it's whatever you want to do. I would say, in terms of what it's like being a deep sea biologist out working in the oceans, out at sea, that in itself, even if you're not on an expedition, we call them cruises, actually. So there's one thing. I don't remember if that's in the book or not. I forget if my editor was like,
you mentioned that.
You had a end note like that. You could rent. You could rent.
So these research cruises, you're spending days, at the least probably weeks, if not months, at sea basically on a mobile research platform. So a ship is where scientists just go and live and do their science 24/7, and that's an extraordinary thing to be able to do. Not a lot of some scientists will go into the field and they'll immerse themselves, but you really are, you're a team working together for that time on this mobile thing. You're stuck in the middle of the ocean, together, working towards understanding this whatever particular part of the deep is that you're interested in, that you're looking at. And it's an extraordinary thing. The camaraderie is amazing. The idea of discovery and exploration is extraordinary. That is a wonderful part of this type of work, is getting to do those sorts of expeditions. They're very expensive. That's the other thing that's a difficult thing about deep sea biology. It's not cheap to get these ships and run them. You can just imagine the costs of the equipment and of the crew and everyone that needs to be involved in that. So that's one side of it. But then we have other technologies like satellite-based technologies, incredible stuff we're learning about the oceans and how they work from space. So there's if there are people out there who are fascinated with big scale processes and are really good at computers, I'm going to say in a very general way, then there's amazingly powerful ways of understanding more about the planet and how it's changing, and the oceans and how they're changing from space and from remotely collected data sets and so on. So I think marine biology can be anything from someone who's focusing down on one group of animals and wants to know everything about that thing and those things, and you go out and you find them and you study them and you bring them back to the lab and you use genetic techniques or whatever it is you have at your fingertips to understand its life, through to stand back and understand how the the oceans work with the currents and with waves and with storms, and how that all ties together. So you've got a huge range of scales at which you could be focusing your mind, I guess, when it comes to the ocean. So I think it can be all sorts of things. It really can. It's a really diverse field, I guess, in that sense. It's science but applied to the ocean in whatever way you can imagine, basically.
Any way you can.
Since we have a big cross section of science, it seems like maybe in this century that there has been a lot more cross-disciplinary flow than there was before. People used to specialize much more, I felt like. And now you're talking about this. We talked about archaeology from space earlier.
Oh,
and it's like, I recognize from, my trajectory in physics and then computers and analyses and statistics, these things have ways to flow out into marine biology and mapping. And then there's the remote sensing, and that can be the space people, that can be the oceanography, it can be physical things. And there's a lot of blending going on that's exciting. And maybe it's just an evolutionary thing. If this is where that all of the interesting things to look at and discoveries to be made at the moment seem to be at these boundaries that have become kind of soft. And so a lot of the physicists, it never would have happened before, but a lot of the physicists I know now are something hyphen physicists.
Right.
Health physicists, radiation physicists, marine physicists, whatever. And that's cool. And as you talk, I'm thinking, it's like, I have these tools that could be involved. And I think, no doubt a lot of other people in different disciplines listen to that or read the book and say, right? There are tools that can be brought to bear on these questions.
And how much do you think it's also like a mindset that comes with someone who's studying a living system, or someone who's studying the physics of it or the chemistry of it? And
my earlier question of predispositions, of blindness, of saying we must think outside the box, but that box is a lot bigger than the one we see, and or it's a lot smaller or something. That's a bad metaphor. If we can't think of it, we don't think of it.
Until there's a reason to look. Motivation to look.
What I find exciting, Helen, is, okay, so you don't need to get the big grant to go on an expedition. You get to say, I'm writing a book. Can I join you on your expedition? And how easy is that to do, to just reach out to someone and do you get turned down more than you get?
Actually, it's I'm in a very lucky position. I'm in a fortunate position that I've come across a lot of very generous and wonderful scientists who take communication very seriously. So they, it's not a small deal by any means to allocate a bunk in a ship to a journalist or to a writer. I mean, I kind of have the benefit of being able to actually do some of the science too, because a lot of the time there'll be a mixed team of people on a ship. So, for example, the cruise I went on when I was researching the book to the Gulf of Mexico, it was a very young team. There were people on the ship who hadn't been to sea before. So for them, it was a learning experience. So, I mean, and that's what I find really wonderful as well about this kind of, and I find that across the board in so many different expeditions I've been involved in and people I've spoken to, is there's often a real mix from the profs all the way down to undergraduates even, who are taken out. And it's all part of that process of becoming a deep sea scientist, is getting out there on ships and getting that experience and learning from others at sea. So everyone is learning. So I was there too. I mean, I'm a trained marine biologist, and maybe most of my experiences in other places, which when I've done my own research, it's usually in shallower seas. But my experience is deepening, and that's valuable on the ship as well. So I could kind of chip in, and a lot of the time, anyone could do it. It's not it's like, go pick out the creatures from that pot of stuff we've just
sure,
and go help them put that thing in, and it's stuff that we can all get involved in if you're want to put yourself on a ship. So I found them very welcoming, incredibly welcoming, and I think it's just an indication of how, I guess it kind of ties back as well, Jeff, to these ideas we spoke of originally, which is the hidden nature of the deep ocean, the secluded nature of what all of this is. And I think I find deep sea scientists incredibly aware of the role they have in showing others what's there.
Yeah.
And so
What's
therefore
there.
the power of communication, whether it's films, whether it's books, radio, whatever it might be, just talking to people. I mean, they do these fantastic live link ups to the deep. There's one I think going on this week. I think it's still happening. The Schmidt Ocean Institute's got one going out. NOAA have the Okeanos Explorer. I'm forgetting one more. It's in the back of the book. I must mention that one too. But basically, you can link up live on YouTube and see what they're doing.
Yeah.
I love it. It comes across my Twitter feed on occasion,
so
and I'm
great.
like, what? And they're
It's the
like,
Ocean
look at
Exploration
this.
Trust. Nautilus is the other one. Aren't they great? I mean, I find them really just. I don't get anything done those days. I'm trying to.
And
work.
then
It's just,
you hear people going, "Oh, that's so cute."
yeah, because it's narrated. What the heck is that? We've never seen that before. Wait a minute.
Right.
Yes.
It's this, and it truly is this kind of. It's like this collaboration. I mean, I know that scientists are kind of pinging in and listening in from all around the world, experts on a particular group, or they'll call someone up and be like, "Hey, wait, we need Chris Marr to tell us what this sea urchin is," because he's the guy who knows sea urchins, and he'll come in and be like, "No, it's this," and it's like
he's the urchin guy.
Science. He's the urchin guy, exactly. So
Yeah.
Or whoever it might, whatever they need. So I love that. So I think deep sea scientists take all of that very seriously in terms of trying to show as many people as possible what's there, and we have those tools now, which is super cool.
Yeah, you've done with this book, I think, a very important work. There were 3 sections, and I didn't read the contents to know what was coming, but there's like seeing how big the ocean is, seeing what all the life is like, and then seeing how people want to exploit it. And this whole mindset of people's like, look, the ocean is underexploited. It's like, what does that even mean? And I think you've demonstrated and started to solve the problem. It's like, you can't have, what do you want to call it, a modern feel about preserving or trying to take care of the oceans without some empathy and some understanding of what's there, what could be lost, and how huge that is. And then not only the exploitation, but then the physical processes of seeing how important the ocean is of a global view of warming and what prevents warming and things. And the fact that, I don't know if I can find it here, that here it is. More than 90% of the extra heat trapped by human emitted carbon dioxide has been taken up by the oceans. Who knew that? Without all the ocean's water, global temperatures on land would already be over 96 degrees Fahrenheit higher than during pre-industrial times. Across the United States, average summer temperatures would exceed 160 degrees Fahrenheit. It's like the oceans aren't just there for sailing on.
Right. Yes.
The heat capacity of the ocean is huge. It is a significant player in moderating temperatures and moderating carbon dioxide, but it's not a limitless resource either.
No, exactly. And I think the deep is definitely like the movement of heat down into the deep, the movement of carbon into the deep, and the limits on that are stuff that we are still getting a grasp on, and an understanding how important it is, and B, how much that might change if we push it,
And then
I mean, it's an amazing buffer for the planet. It's an absolute life-giving buffer to the planet. Anyway, even
there
if
are
there weren't
amazing
humans
things like that. And then the whole discussion you had of orange roughy or slimehead exploitation, and the fact that, like with the whales, is sometimes I think we have a romantic notion of whaling as they go out and they catch 2 or 3 a year, versus thousands were killed, and there were not much more than thousands. There were maybe 100,000. Significant fractions of them were killed every year. And when you read, it's like, well, what's wrong with catching a few fish? It's like, we're not catching a few fish. We're talking about 160,000 tons a month, a year, whatever. Just simply enormous amounts that reduce populations by extraordinary amounts. And
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the lesson, sort of the two lessons I think in the book. One being that, from the whalings, the impact that whaling could have had with fairly basic technologies was extraordinary. I mean, it got wrapped up in the what people perhaps don't quite appreciate so much is that, sure, there was those sort of, the Moby Dick era of whaling, and that was the romantic side of it, back then. And even that was causing huge impacts on populations. And then there was like a 21st century whaling spree, which was even worse when things got mechanized, and more than twice the number of sperm whales were caught than are alive today. Something like, I think it's something like 750,000 were killed, and we think about 360,000 are left. And then the idea that technology is now applied to catching things like you say, like these fish, these orange roughy, which can live for 250 years, which don't mature until they're maybe 20 or 30, 40 years old. And they live on these underwater seamounts, which are underwater mountains, volcanoes, some of them active, some of them dormant, these huge physical features, which are pretty easy to find. And the fish very, helpfully congregate around these features to spawn. So they're easy to catch. You've got the technologies to find those mountains. You've got the gear to be able to fish at 1,000 meters, 3,000 feet, 4,000 feet down. And and one trawl net can bring up tens of tons, hundreds of tons. I'm going to just check the number actually on that, because that's one of the things that I am forgetting exactly how many.
And while you looked that up, and they had a promotional campaign essentially to get people to want to eat these fish. Hey, we're catching these fish. We should sell them. Oh, people aren't eating them. Let's tell them they should eat them.
Well, it was an underexploited market.
Right.
The idea of underexploitation, is 50 tons. So in one single trawl net, you could get 50 tons of these fish, which is just, it's crazy. And then, and the numbers kind of, they stay high, and then they suddenly collapse. And then you realize, we've taken all the fish. And by the way, we're also destroying all these 1,000-year-old corals in the process too, that live on these seamounts. And once they've gone, then it gets a bit easier to fish and so on. But it wraps this idea of underexploitation. It's this idea that the oceans are there for us, to use, as if that was why they exist and why the life in the ocean exists. It's
my shortest note from your book was around page 180. I wrote, "The perils of extractivism."
Yeah, exactly. We're doing it again and again, and the question is, I think now we face is, well, is there a way for humanity to actually learn from past mistakes?
Are there new attitudes developing? Do we have hope?
So. I have to have hope at this point. Otherwise, I don't know what we do. I think the issue of deep sea mining is critical right at this moment in time. We've seen very important developments have happened since I've written the book.
And so the good thing I want to maybe finish with or something is that your book has given us this wonderful image of some idea of how big the ocean is, how varied the ocean is, of the amazing creatures that live there, how they live everywhere there, quite contrary to our expectations of not so long ago. And putting all that next to, and here's what people want to do to it. Is a useful dramatization of what's going on, what can be lost, what the values are, and things. I thought that was
thank you.
That was very useful.
Thank you. I mean, that was my plan, I think, was hopefully to show that sort of what's here and what's at stake, and why we should care.
Well,
that was my ambition.
Your subtitle ends with, "And the looming threat that imperils it." And in my mind, I start clicking off things. Plastics in the ocean, climate change, overfishing. But then when we got to the part of deep sea mining, literally digging into the ocean floor and the crust and extracting metals and all the implications for that, I was astounded. I was angry. I couldn't believe it. And so why don't you sort of recap a little bit just for our audience what's here? Jeff's talked about a little bit. I think people should hear what can happen, and you took the knock-on effects of the ecosystems.
Yeah, I'm sorry I made you angry, but that was kind of the point.
Hey, when I'm telling my friends and my daughter, I'm like, oh my gosh, this book has just upset me so much. But I mean, anger is a good way.
Force, I think, and that's and everyone should be angry. We all should be incandescent with rage. I am glowing with rage, and I have been for years. So I think I've managed to kind of know how to sort of or trying to channel it. I guess it's what this book is. It's the effort of me channeling that anger that this could be happening. Okay, so I mean, so we're in a big second wave now of interest in deep sea mining. This began in the 60s and 70s, just up to the early 80s, when people originally thought, hey, there are these rocks at the bottom of the ocean that are just rocks, and they're full of metals, and we could make some money out of that, and we could use those. And we're going to run out of metals on land, aren't we? You know, there's a finite resource on land. We could find this alternative, and it's true. There is a lot of metal, not as much as people originally thought, but there is a lot of metal in the deep ocean. But for various reasons, that first wave of interest faded away and stopped. But now we're in the second wave now, and the big story we're being told by the companies who want to make an enormous amount of money. They think, well, if in various ways they're going to make a lot of money out of this. Because we now need metals for electric car batteries and for solar panels and for wind turbines and for things that are going to get us out of this climate crisis that we're currently living through. So, and it was a big reason why I wanted to write the book, actually, because I kept hearing this narrative of this is how we're going to have green global economies, is using deep sea metals, and that's our best choice. They are going to have less impact than mining on land is. We desperately need all of these metals in order to make this stuff. And I just thought, well, is that true? And what's really behind those figures? And you know, and to get to grips with that, I figured I'd need to spend some time, and a book would be a good way to spend that time looking into this issue. So, you know, so I did that, and I was looking and speaking to people about like predicting where metals are going to come from in the future and what's going to be needed, and all those kinds of things are really complicated, turns out. It's no simple matter to say we are going to need X, Y, Z elements and amounts of it in 10, 15, 20, 50 years time, and it's going to come from these sources in these places. That simply is, I mean, that's what anyone who knows anything about mining will tell you. There's no way we can be sure what that's going to be. Then you talk to the technologists, people who are looking at how to build electric car batteries, who are looking at how to do the next generations of these technologies, which sure, we are going to need to get ourselves off of fossil fuels. We are going to need metals. We're going to need these technologies to produce energy, to store it, to move ourselves around the planet. But is it going to be the ways we have now? And that's what shocked me, is that a lot of these arguments in favor of deep sea mining are based on technologies that could quite quickly become out of date, actually. Cobalt is one example. It's a really important metal at the moment, cobalt, in this whole debate, because it's one that could come from the deep ocean, from these rocky nodules. But most of it currently comes from really horrible mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo. No doubt. Those are dreadful for human beings, dreadful for the environment. That needs to be cleaned up. They need to be figured out. One thing is, even if we do go to the deep ocean, it doesn't do anything, you know, it's not a zero-sum game. We're going to have both. Those mines in Congo are going to keep going. But equally, there are, you know, and it is currently an element used in electric car batteries, but people are working on cobalt-free batteries. Tesla are already doing that. It isn't that long until the technologies can and should be able to advance to say, well, what minerals do we need? What metals can we get hold of? How, by the way, are we going to recycle all of this and reuse all of this stuff and be really smart about the way we transition to a green economy? We're very smart. Human beings can be incredibly inventive and clever about the way we do things. So oftentimes we can't, but I do really think that if we get the right people pushing in the right directions, we will be able to make those transitions without saying that we need the deep ocean. And then, you know, aside from the demand part of the question, is the whole ecological impact of it, and the big, and I'm going to say the big lies that are being spread, and they are lies, and they are openly being made at the moment, as we're increasingly discovering by these big mining companies. They are lying about the fact that you can compare the impacts of deep sea mining to land-based mining. We cannot. We simply do not have the understanding yet of deep sea ecosystems. We have already got a good guess it's going to be awful by the fact that we're extracting basically the basis of habitats. There's not only these rocks in abyssal plains, we're looking at exploiting hydrothermal vents, these extraordinary ecosystems we've been talking about. They are also a target for mining. Even if they'll tell you that they'll mine ones that have become inactive, that's still a big question. Even if you can find them, is it really the case that they've completely gone out, if you like? And these underwater mountains, these seamounts are also covered in metal-rich crusts, and they're also a target for mining. So we've got these three places in the ocean that are hugely important for biodiversity, incredibly important, although we're still finding out important for processes in the health of the ocean more widely. And the impacts of mining aren't just going to be where that mine is operating, these are going to be causing a huge amounts of light pollution, huge amounts of noise pollution, and sedimentation too. These great big plumes of muddy sediments are going to be thrown up into the water column. There's tailings that will go back into the ocean after the mining ores have been processed on a ship. There's all these different aspects to the impacts of mining, which we are only just starting to get a handle on. So, to make it a simplistic statement, it's going to be better than land-based mining. We just can't say that. It's not true.
I was one thing you made a point about was the tailings and all this, the byproduct will get into, if there's some toxic metals, chemicals, will get into the fish we consume.
Yeah,
the things we consume.
A huge portion of take tuna, for example. A lot of the tuna is coming from the Pacific, where there's big plans to go mining, and they not only dive down into the twilight zone to feed. These animals are going to be going right into these places where mining tailings are going to potentially be dumped, and it could easily, we're just again trying to understand how these ecosystems are going to get contaminated. But these ores are going to have toxic metals, which are going to get ground up. Some of that's going to probably end up getting back. I mean, we just don't know how that whole process is going to work. But it could well be tuna, whale sharks, whales, seabirds are going to be, that their ecosystems are going to be contaminated. Their food webs are going to be contaminated by this process, which is, even if you look, the footprint of a mine is going to be enormous, hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, and that's just the start of it. So. Yes. It is crazy,
but happily. So it's not just an expose, and so I still enjoyed overall the book because the horror of the exploitation chapters was heightened, as it should be, just by how much we learned from the first two sections about what an exciting and big and, I don't know, teeming place the ocean is, and how much is going on. And then, I mean, it's like, how can you compare these things? You can't, but it helps to know how much you can lose before you talk about what could be lost. So I didn't feel like it was a sad story.
I loved
I enjoyed
the
the first part so much, and it certainly informed. It made for a better appreciation of the discussion of some of these industrial exploitive problems.
Right. Well, and I had hope because there was that prescience of the law of the seas, the UN. That was very.
Yes.
I was like, oh, thank goodness somebody was on.
And right now, I mean, it's a critical time for all of these issues. I don't think I could have possibly anticipated that my book was going to come out at a time when some really big, important decisions are being made since I finished writing it. So I'm hoping, and I'm writing more about this in the wider press. A lot of people are talking about the ever more important need for a moratorium. I mean, as you've seen in the book, I make a strong case for no exploitation in the deep, and I stand by that absolutely. But I mean, the good first step is going to be no deep sea mining for 10 years if we could do that. And there's ever more reason for that to be for that to happen. Whether it will, we'll see. I think it's a huge test of that system, of this law of the sea, and the fact that there are parts of that which say we have to protect the deep ocean. We have to protect the oceans as a whole. They matter, they really do, and that's not just words. That's that is law. So it's going to be. There are some fantastic marine ocean lawyers who are working really hard on this. There's all sorts of wonderful people. That's what gives me hope, actually, is that there are incredible scientists, lawyers, economists, people working on this issue. It's not just me saying these things by any means. And more and more people are learning to care, I think, and or just seeing, hopefully, that there's so much to lose. Like you say, Jeff, it's not just we can do this because there's nothing there, and it doesn't it has no consequence.
Right.
It has huge consequences, but also just how wonderful to know that there are all these things in the ocean. Still, there are still scaly foot snails and yeti crabs and crazy luminous jellyfish and all sorts of things. Just knowing them, even if we don't get to see them ourselves, it's great that they exist.
Yeah. It's so wonderful. Well,
it's wondrous. Yeah,
it's amazing. So actually, we're coming to the end of an hour. And so I just want to remind people again, we've been talking about The Brilliant Abyss by Helen Scales. And I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. And it's okay if it also made me angry because at the end, I wasn't angry about the ocean or the scientists. I was angry about greed. I suppose. But yeah, so we are so glad you came on. It's such a pleasure to finally meet you after having read some of your books. And yeah, so do you have plans for another, or is this a good stopping point for a few years anyway?
I seem to want to keep doing this, so I do have plans for more books.
Oh, good.
And it comes at a good time. It's like a very cyclical thing being an author. You spend all that time with a subject and you write the book and you cry and you sweat and you have joyous times all the way through that writing process. And then you forget about it for a bit and it goes off to the publishers and they come back and they say, change this, and you like work hard and work more and more. And then it becomes a thing that you can hold. This is the British version. I want to take a vote sometime on whether you prefer the British version or the American cover. I like them both in different ways.
Yeah.
And then, and then I get to do this, which is just the best part of all of this, is speaking to wonderful, wonderful people like yourselves who have thought about my words and my ideas. And it's just a huge privilege. So that's the time when I go, oh yeah, I want to do this again. I get to do this. So I do. I'm holding on to exactly what it's going to be, but I will have an announcement very soon about the next book, which will still be ocean related. I hopefully will still have the mixture of ideas that I've managed to capture in this one, but I will be carrying on. I'm also doing some children's books as well. I'm just starting.
I think I saw something about that.
I have one already out about the Great Barrier Reef, which is wonderful, and I have a couple more in the pipeline too. And that for me is a great adventure as well. So it's
that's fantastic.
all great. Yeah.
Excellent.
Oh, wonderful. Wow. We are so glad you joined us.
Well, thank you. No, absolutely. Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions. And it was a really wonderful conversation.
Thank you for your book.
Thank you very much.
Which was a very valuable read.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much.
All right. On behalf of us here at Read Science, we'll see you guys again. See you again.